Welcome to our 50-question BCBA exam review. This is a confusing question set, so the goal is not to recognize a familiar phrase. The goal is to find the deciding relationship in the exact stem. Every item is original, designed around plausible distractors, and aligned to the published BCBA 6th edition content outline. These are not official BACB exam questions. Keep a running score, but also mark the reason for each miss. Relation, evidence, measurement, ethics, sequence, or implementation. If you want another time set after this lesson, our free BCBA mock exam is waiting on screen. Before we start, let me make clear what this set is and why it matters. These are not 50 random definitions or 50 deliberately obscure English passages. They are 50 decision boundary questions drawn across all 9 6th edition domains. The current set contains 3A, 7B, 6C, 5D, 6E, 6F, 7G, 5H, and 5I items, representing 46 unique test content outline tasks. So the set moves from philosophy and principles of behavior through measurement, experimental design, ethics, assessment, intervention, supervision, and implementation. It is a focused, confusing question set, not a complete 104-task test content outline review. What makes the items confusing is the relationship between facts, not the vocabulary alone. A top-ranked item in a preference assessment is not automatically a reinforcer. A 60% score changes meaning when the observer switches from partial to whole interval. A function-based plan can be well-designed while its delivery fails, and a descriptive pattern can suggest a function without proving it. The same kind of near-miss appears in design, ethics, competence, prompt fading, generalization, and treatment integrity. Each question keeps plausible options alive, then asks which one the STEM actually supports. That is why these 50 can solve a real exam problem. They train you to stop matching labels and start checking the decisive relation. What consequence follows behavior? What the scoring rule counts, what the design controls, what consent or competence allows, what the data establish, and what the professional must do first. On the exam, that move helps you reject answers that are true in another context, depend on missing evidence, or skip a necessary sequence. Keep a running score, but also mark the error type: relation, evidence, measurement, design, ethics, sequence, or implementation. The goal is not just to know the answer to these 50. It is to recognize the same boundary when the STEM is new. Before the first item, use 4 passes. Isolate the clue that changes the decision. Name the rule, relation, measure, design, or ethical limit being tested. Test each option against that clue instead of asking which sentence sounds most familiar. Then transfer the move. Say the portable rule in your own words. We will read every STEM and every option, pause before the reveal, announce the correct answer once, and then explain why the other options miss this exact case. Question 1. A notification tone has repeatedly preceded an abrupt, painfully loud alarm. The tone alone now evokes a startle. A user then learns that opening an app immediately stops the tone, and app opening becomes more likely when the tone sounds. How should the two effects be classified? A. Startle is responded. App opening is negatively reinforced. B. Both are respondent because the same tone precedes both responses. C. Startle is operant. App opening is respondent because tone offset follows it. D. Startle is respondent. App opening is strengthened by negative punishment because the tone is removed. Name the two relations before you decide. Choose A. Startle is responded. App opening is negatively reinforced. The startle is elicited by a previously paired stimulus. App opening increases because it removes that stimulus. The tone elicits a conditioned respondent, while the consequence of opening the app is tone removal, an escape relation that strengthens operant behavior. The trap here is that same cue does not mean same relation. B. A shared antecedent does not make both relations respondent. The app response changes because of its consequence. C. The classifications are reversed. Startle is elicited, while app opening is consequence-shaped. D. Removing the tone increases app opening, so the relation is negative reinforcement. Negative punishment would decrease a response. Ask whether the response is elicited by antecedent pairing or strengthened by a consequence. Question 2. During one interval, behavior occurs for 2 seconds in the middle and is absent at the end. Which scoring pattern is correct? A. Whole yes, partial yes, momentary time sampling, yes. B. Whole no, partial no, momentary time sampling, yes. C. Whole no, partial yes, momentary time sampling, no. D. Whole yes, partial no, momentary time sampling, no. Do not calculate yet. First name when a yes is recorded. For this comparison, C is strongest. Whole no, partial yes, momentary time sampling, no. Behavior is brief, not continuous, and absent at the check moment. Whole requires the full interval. Partial requires any occurrence. Momentary time sampling uses the endpoint check. The trap here is that one event, 3 scoring rules. A. Whole and momentary time sampling requirements are not met. B. Partial should be yes because behavior occurred. D. Whole cannot be yes when behavior lasted only 2 seconds. Apply each scoring rule separately to the same interval. Question 3. A team calls task refusal random oppositionality. The BCBA withholds judgment, defines and measures refusal across task conditions, then abandons an initial escape hypothesis when replicated data favor attention. Which pair best describes the 2 decision points in order? A. Determinism first. Parsimony when the initial hypothesis is revised. B. Philosophic doubt first. Empiricism only after an intervention succeeds. C. Empiricism first. Philosophic doubt when the initial hypothesis is revised. D. Pragmatism first. Determinism when the attention pattern replicates. Separate the observed evidence from the attitude used to revise a conclusion. The defensible answer is C. Empiricism first. Philosophic doubt when the initial hypothesis is revised. The first decision substitutes objective measurement for a label. The second keeps a scientific conclusion tentative when replicated evidence conflicts with it. Direct observation and measurement demonstrate empiricism. Revising a favored explanation in response to better evidence demonstrates philosophic doubt. The trap here is that measure first. Keep conclusions revisable. A. Determinism supports searching for lawful variables, but revising a contradicted hypothesis is not specifically parsimony. B. Withholding judgment may involve doubt, but the first named action is direct measurement. Empiricism is present before intervention. D. Pragmatism concerns useful prediction and influence, while replicated data do not by themselves turn hypothesis revision into determinism. Separate the attitude used to gather evidence from the attitude used to keep conclusions revisable. Question 4. Apparent signs and authorization permitting communication with the school team. The teacher asks the BCBA to email the client's complete clinical record, although only current classroom goals and safety procedures are relevant to the meeting. What is the best response? A. Send the full record because any valid authorization removes limits on disclosure. B. Refuse all collaboration because school personnel are outside the treatment organization. C. Send a record after removing billing pages because clinical information is always relevant. D. Confirm the authorization scope and share only information necessary for the stated purpose. Ask what the authorization covers and what the current request changes. Here, the evidence supports D. Confirm the authorization scope and share only information necessary for the stated purpose. Authorization permits communication, but the request exceeds what is needed for the stated school purpose. The BCBA should verify that the disclosure is authorized and limit it to information relevant to the agreed purpose. The trap here is that authorization is not a blank check. A. Authorization is not a blanket instruction to disclose every record regardless of purpose or scope. B. Authorized, clinically relevant collaboration may occur. The problem is over-disclosure not collaboration itself. C. Removing billing pages does not make the remainder automatically necessary or within scope. Authorization answers whether disclosure may occur. Purpose and scope determine how much should be shared. Question 5. Music is selected first on most multiple stimulus without replacement arrays. In a later reinforcer assessment, contingent music increases the target response above a control condition during the first block, but responding returns to control levels after prolonged music access. Which conclusion is best supported? A. Music was preferred and functioned as a reinforcer initially. The later loss of effect may reflect changed motivating conditions. B. The later response decline demonstrates punishment because responding decreased relative to the first block. C. The preference assessment is invalid because a valid preferred item must sustain reinforcement across all blocks. D. Music should be classified as a reinforcer across conditions because any initial increase establishes a permanent stimulus function. Classify the preference assessment result before calling the item a reinforcer. Question 5 resolves to A. Music was preferred and functioned as a reinforcer initially. The later loss of effect may reflect changed motivating conditions. Selection establishes preference. The initial contingent increase demonstrates reinforcement under those conditions, and prolonged access can alter current value. The two assessments answer different questions. Music was preferred, and the initial experimental increase shows a reinforcing effect. The later decline limits generality and suggests a possible abolishing operation. The trap here is that preferred does not mean permanently reinforcing. B. A decline from the first block to control levels does not show suppression below an appropriate comparison caused by contingent music. C. A preference assessment can be valid even when reinforcing effectiveness changes with access, response effort, schedule, or context. D. Reinforcement is a functional relation under specified conditions, not an immutable property established forever by one block. Separate preference, demonstrated reinforcement, and the motivating conditions that can change a reinforcer's current effectiveness. Question 6. Assessment indicates that severe task refusal is maintained by escape. The client reliably uses a picture card to request a break. Staff can make brief demand adjustments and reinforce the card, but they cannot safely maintain demands through prolonged refusal without more training. Which initial plan is best? A. Begin break request training with graded demand adjustments. Train staff and measure integrity before considering more intensive components. B. Add coached escape extinction immediately because direct function match should take priority while staff skills develop. C. Use task completion tokens now and practice the break card only during easier activities that staff can manage consistently. D. Focus first on intensive staff training and postpone direct treatment until the complete package can be implemented with high integrity. Match function, client need, staff capacity, and implementation integrity. Select A. Begin break request training with graded demand adjustments. Train staff and measure integrity before considering more intensive components. The plan must address escape, use an available alternative response, fit current staff capacity, and reduce implementation risk. The staged function-based option uses the available functionally equivalent response, builds staff capacity, adjusts task difficulty, and measures implementation before considering a component that current staff cannot yet deliver safely. The trap here is that function match still requires feasible delivery. B. Escape extinction is function-related, but immediate use is premature when the STEM identifies current safety and integrity limits. C. Reliable token delivery does not replace teaching the available functionally equivalent response under the difficult task conditions where it is needed. D. Staff training is necessary, but postponing the feasible communication and demand adjustment components delays an available function-based benefit. The best intervention answer must fit function, evidence, client needs, implementation capacity, and risk, not just one of those variables. Question 7. 2 interventions alternate each session. but the effect of one continues into the next condition. What most directly threatens interpretation of this multi-element comparison? A. Failure to stagger intervention across tiers. B. Lack of a quantitative criterion. C. Failure to withdraw treatment for a full phase. D. Carryover, multiple treatment interference between conditions. Ask whether the carryover makes the comparison independent. The STEM makes D the best response. Carryover, multiple treatment interference between conditions. The effect of one condition persists into the next condition. Carryover creates multiple treatment interference and weakens attribution of current responding to the current condition. The trap here is that carryover can mimic a treatment difference. A. Staggered tiers define multiple baseline. B. Quantitative criteria define changing criterion. C. Full withdrawal phases define reversal, not multi-element. In multi-element designs, ask whether one condition contaminates the next. Question 8. A technician describes and demonstrates a data collection procedure at 100% accuracy during supervision. On the unit, forms are stored in a locked office. The login often fails, and the shift lead tells staff to complete notes after the shift. Submission remains low. What should the supervisor address first? A. Repeat the full skills training sequence, because low performance always proves a skill deficit. B. Issue a warning before changing the environment so consequences can establish compliance. C. Lower the documentation standard because the technician performs correctly during supervision. D. Analyze and correct access, workflow, and competing expectation barriers while continuing to monitor performance. Separate what the learner can do from what the environment permits. D. Best matches the stated decision. Analyze and correct access, workflow, and competing expectation barriers while continuing to monitor performance. The technician demonstrates the skill, while the work setting blocks or competes with performance. The first intervention should target the environmental and performance management variables implicated by the assessment, not repeat already mastered instruction. The trap here is that skill present does not remove system barriers. A. Demonstrated accurate performance argues against beginning with wholesale retraining. B. Punitive action before addressing documented barriers is poorly matched to the assessed variables. C. Competence in supervision does not justify abandoning required workplace performance. Can do, but does not do in context. Assess resources, effort, cues, and consequences before retraining. Question 9. A learner earns 1 bite of crackers after each completed worksheet. After eating a large snack, worksheet completion drops sharply, although crackers are still delivered after every completion and the contingency has not changed. Which interpretation is strongest? A. Extinction, because the previously reinforced response decreased. B. An abolishing operation reduced the current value of crackers and their evocative effect. C. Negative punishment, because access to food before work removed motivation. D. Stimulus control weakened, because the worksheet no longer signaled reinforcement availability. Identify a change in value before you label a change in behavior. On this item, the answer is B. An abolishing operation reduced the current value of crackers and their evocative effect. The reinforcer is still contingent and available. Only recent food consumption changed its value. Satiation functions as an abolishing operation by reducing cracker effectiveness and behavior that has produced crackers. The trap here is that a value change is not extinction. A. Extinction requires withholding the reinforcer for the response. Crackers are still delivered. C. No consequence is removed after worksheet completion to reduce that response. D. The worksheet may still signal the contingency. The value-altering variable is what changed. If the contingency stays intact, but reinforcer value changes, think motivating operation before extinction. Question 10. Across equal length sessions, crying occurs 1 to 6 times. Episode length also varies from seconds to 15 minutes. The team must decide how much instruction is unavailable because of crying, not merely how long a typical episode lasts. Which primary measure best matches that decision? A. Mean duration per episode, because typical episode length summarizes the severity of each occurrence. B. Rate per instructional hour, because opportunity time should be standardized. C. Whole interval percentage, because it estimates sustained crying across instruction. D. Total duration per session, because the decision concerns cumulative instructional time lost. Choose the dimension that answers the stated instructional decision. The complete interpretation is D. Total duration per session, because the decision concerns cumulative instructional time lost. Both episode count and episode length vary, and the decision concerns cumulative instruction unavailable across the session. Total duration aggregates all crying time in the session and directly represents cumulative instruction unavailable when both count and episode length vary. The trap here is that measure the decision, not the familiar dimension. A. Mean duration describes a typical episode, but can stay unchanged while cumulative lost time changes with episode count. B. Rate standardizes how often crying begins, but does not incorporate the large variation in episode length. C. Whole interval recording can estimate sustained occurrence, but direct total duration is closer to actual time lost. Select the dimension that matches the decision, not the measure that is easiest to collect. Question 11. A behavior analyst studies a learner's self-talk and private reports as behavior to be analyzed, while avoiding explanations that appeal to an unobservable inner cause. Which position is illustrated? A. Methodological behaviorism, because only publicly observable events may be included in a behavioral account. B. Mentalism, because the client's anxiety is accepted as the initiating cause of avoidance. C. Pragmatism, because whichever explanation feels most useful is selected without further analysis. D. Radical behaviorism, because private events are included without treating them as autonomous causes. Keep private events in the analysis without treating them as hidden causes. Choose D. Radical behaviorism, because private events are included without treating them as autonomous causes. Private events are acknowledged, but the analysis continues to environmental and behavioral relations. Radical behaviorism includes private events within the subject matter of behavior science, while rejecting them as unexplained inner agents that terminate analysis. The trap here is that private events can be studied without mentalism. A. Methodological behaviorism restricts scientific analysis to publicly observable events, which the STEM explicitly does not do. B. The report is not being used as an autonomous causal explanation. Measurable relations are still examined. C. Pragmatism concerns effective action, but it does not define this treatment of private events. Including private events without turning them into inner agents points to radical behaviorism. Question 12. A learner receives a break after using a taught break request. Because of current staffing limits, task refusal still occasionally produces a brief delay before work resumes. Which statement is most accurate? A. The plan is differential reinforcement of other behavior because refusal is sometimes absent. B. Differential reinforcement cannot occur until extinction is perfect. C. Reinforcing the name break request is differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. Extinction is a separate treatment dimension. D. The plan is differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior because refusal still occurs. Separate reinforcement for the alternative from the consequence for problem behavior. For this comparison, C is strongest. Reinforcing the name break request is differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. Extinction is a separate treatment dimension. The break request earns reinforcement. Refusal still sometimes contacts escape. That is differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. Extinction can strengthen the contrast, but is not required for the label. The trap here is that differential reinforcement of alternative behavior can occur before extinction is perfect. A. Differential reinforcement of other behavior would make reinforcement depend on refusal being absent, which is not the stated relation. B. The BACB content explicitly includes differential reinforcement with and without extinction. D. No lower acceptable rate of refusal is used as the reinforcement criterion. Label the stated reinforcement contingency first. Evaluate extinction as a separate design feature. Question 13. A BCBA with no training in pediatric feeding is asked to treat food refusal involving weight loss and possible swallowing difficulty. The family wants services to begin tomorrow. What is the best initial response? A. Collect low-risk mealtime data first and defer medical coordination until a stable behavioral pattern emerges. B. Protect safety, coordinate medical evaluation, and seek qualified consultation or referral. C. Obtain medical clearance, then independently use a familiar escape protocol while developing feeding competence. D. Transfer the case entirely to medical providers and avoid behavioral assessment until all medical causes are excluded. Order safety and competence before an intervention that exceeds training. The defensible answer is B. Protect safety, coordinate medical evaluation, and seek qualified consultation or referral. The case includes possible medical risk and requires expertise the BCBA does not possess. The safest ethical sequence is to protect the client, stay within competence, coordinate needed medical evaluation, and obtain qualified support or refer rather than independently implementing treatment. The trap here is that urgency does not expand competence. A. Low-risk data may be useful, but weight loss and possible swallowing difficulty make delayed medical coordination unsafe. C. Medical clearance does not create specialized behavioral competence or make independent feeding treatment appropriate. D. Medical coordination is necessary, but behavioral assessment and referral planning need not wait for every possible medical cause to be excluded. Risk first, competence second, then consultation, coordination, documentation, and referral as the case requires. Question 14. And functional behavior assessment combines clear interviews, repeated direct observations, and treatment data that converge on an escape hypothesis. Safety risks make experimental evocation hazardous. Which statement is most accurate? A. Every functional behavior assessment still requires a standard functional analysis. B. The functional behavior assessment is invalid without all standard test conditions. C. The BCBA should ignore the safety issue. D. Assessment selection should balance confidence, risk, feasibility, and the decision being made. Use converging information without creating unnecessary risk. Here, the evidence supports D. Assessment selection should balance confidence, risk, feasibility, and the decision being made. Converging evidence exists, while experimental risk is material. Not every case requires the same functional analysis. The assessment plan should match the question and safeguards. The trap here is that functional behavior assessment evidence can guide without risky evocation. A. Functional behavior assessment is broader than a mandatory standard functional analysis sequence. B. Validity does not depend on using every textbook condition. C. Client welfare and feasibility are part of competent assessment. Do not turn a powerful method into a mandatory ritual. Question 15. After written instruction, modeling, and repeated role play with feedback, a trainee performs a prompting procedure at 100% integrity in the training room. On the busy unit, integrity falls to 60%, especially when materials are stored differently and interruptions occur. What is the best next supervisory step? A. Add a knowledge quiz and require 90% before the trainee returns to the unit. B. Provide end-of-week graph feedback while leaving unit materials and practice conditions unchanged. C. Arrange in-situ rehearsal and feedback under varied unit conditions and program common cues and materials. D. Repeat the written instruction and modeling in the training room until performance is overlearned. Find the transfer failure outside the training room. Question 15 resolves to C. Arrange in-situ rehearsal and feedback under varied unit conditions and program common cues and materials. The skill occurs in role play, but not under natural unit stimuli. So the deficit is generalization and contextual performance rather than missing initial behavioral skills training components. In situ practice with feedback, varied exemplars, and common stimuli extends the already acquired performance to the setting in which it must occur. The trap here is that training room mastery is not unit transfer. A knowledge criterion does not reproduce the interruptions, cues, or material arrangement controlling unit performance. B. Delayed outcome feedback may help monitoring, but it omits supported practice and leaves the contextual mismatches unchanged. D. The trainee already demonstrates mastery in that setting. More training room exposure does not target the transfer failure. When behavioral skills training performance is strong only in training, program generalization with in-situ practice, varied examples, and common stimuli. Question 16. A therapist alternates in fixed ratio 3 component and a variable interval 30-second component. In one condition, a red card is displayed during fixed ratio 3 and a blue card during variable interval 30 seconds. In a second condition, the same components alternate with no correlated signals. Were the two arrangements in order? A. Mixed then multiple. B. Multiple then mixed. C. Concurrent then chained. D. Chained then tandem. Count the signals. Are they on together, separately, or not at all? Select B. Multiple then mixed. The first alternation has component correlated stimuli. The second does not. A multiple schedule signals each alternating component, whereas a mixed schedule alternates components without distinct correlated stimuli. The trap here is that signals distinguish multiple from mixed. A. The labels are reversed because the first condition includes explicit signals. C. Concurrent schedules are simultaneously available, not successively alternated as described. D. Chained and tandem schedules require component completion leading through a sequence to terminal reinforcement. Alternating components. Signals present means multiple. Signals absent means mixed. Question 17. Correct responses occur on only 3 of 50 trials. The BCBA is concerned that agreement on the many jointly incorrect trials will hide observer disagreement about the rare correct responses. Which calculation best targets that concern? A. Score trial agreement using trials where either observer recorded a correct response. B. Trial by trial agreement using all 50 correct and incorrect codes. C. Unscored trial agreement using trials where either observer recorded an incorrect response. D. Total count agreement comparing only the observer's session totals. Choose an agreement index that shows whether the rare correct response was matched. The STEM makes it the best response. Scored trial agreement using trials where either observer recorded a correct response. Correct responses are rare, and the stated concern is inflation from the large number of jointly unscored trials. Scored trial agreement restricts the comparison to trials on which at least one observer scored the rare event, making disagreement about correct responses visible. The trap here is that rare correct responses need the right agreement lens. B. Trial by trial agreement preserves location, but can be inflated by the many trials both observers score incorrect. C. Unscored trial agreement is most sensitive when non-occurrence is rare, the opposite prevalence pattern. D. Session totals can agree even when observers identify different trials as correct. Use scored agreement for rare occurrence and unscored agreement for rare non-occurrence. Prevalence determines which agreements can inflate the total. Question 18. In a multiple baseline across behaviors study, all 3 behaviors improve before the intervention is introduced to the second and third tiers. What is the main design concern? A. The criterion changes too slowly. B. The staggered replication is weakened. C. Carryover between alternating conditions is too high. D. The behavior is not reversible. Look for stable tiers before you call a staggered change causal. B. Best matches the stated decision. The staggered replication is weakened. Untreated tiers change before their scheduled intervention starts. The design loses evidence that change is tied to each staggered introduction. The trap here is that early change weakens staggered replication. A. Changing criterion logic is not being used. C. No rapid alternation is described. D. Reversibility is not the central multiple baseline test. Untreated tiers should remain stable until their own start. Question 19. A teacher defines success as no more than 2 questions in each 5-minute segment. Questions may occur close together. No minimum time between questions is required. Which contingency most directly implements that goal? A. Deliver a reinforcer when the 20-minute total is 8 or fewer, regardless of when the questions occur. B. Deliver a token after each 5-minute segment with no more than 2 questions, then exchange tokens at lesson end. C. Reinforce a question only when at least 3 minutes have passed since the previous question. D. Deliver a token after each 5-minute segment in which no questions occur. Translate the segment rule into a contingency, not a spacing rule. On this item, the answer is B. Deliver a token after each 5-minute segment with no more than 2 questions, then exchange tokens at lesson end. Success is defined by a response count ceiling within every 5-minute segment, while closed-together responses remain acceptable. That specifies interval differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior rather than whole session or spaced responding differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior. A separate low-rate criterion in each 5-minute segment is an interval differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior arrangement. It directly matches the local count criterion without adding a minimum spacing requirement. The trap here is that segment limit is not an inter-response time rule. A whole session total can still be met after an early burst and therefore does not directly distribute responding across segments. C. A spaced responding differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior imposes a minimum time between individual responses, but the stem explicitly allows 2 questions to occur close together. D. Requiring 0 questions is differential reinforcement of other behavior and conflicts with the goal of allowing appropriate questions at a reduced rate. Match differential reinforcement of low rates of behavior to the pattern being changed. Full session totals, local interval counts, or spacing between responses. Question 20. A treatment reduces repetitive questioning by 70%, and staff implement it accurately. The adult client reports that the replacement script feels infantilizing and asks for a different way to obtain clarification. No safety issue requires keeping the current response form. What is the best next step? A. Keep the plan unchanged because objective behavior change establishes overall success. B. Discontinue all treatment because any dislike proves the intervention is ineffective. C. Reassess social validity with the client and modify the replacement response while preserving the functional relation. D. Reduce integrity checks so the client experiences the plan less consistently. Measure social validity as well as the behavior change. The complete interpretation is C. Reassess social validity with the client and modify the replacement response while preserving the functional relation. The plan changes behavior and is implemented well, but the client rejects the form of the replacement response. Effectiveness and integrity do not substitute for social validity. The replacement can be redesigned collaboratively while retaining its functional outcome. The trap here is that behavior change does not guarantee social validity. A. Behavior reduction alone does not establish that goals and procedures are acceptable and meaningful to the client. B. The concern supports revision, not the conclusion that all intervention is ineffective. D. Lowering integrity obscures evaluation and does not address the client's stated concern. A technically effective plan can still require redesign when the client rejects its goals or procedures. Question 21. After eating salty pretzels, a learner presses a water button more often when a blue light is on. The record does not show whether the light has signaled water availability, been paired with times when water was unavailable, or simply been present during training. Which conclusion is justified? A. The pretzels establish water's value, and increased pressing proves the light is a discriminative stimulus. B. The pretzels establish water's value. The light's function requires its learning and contingency history. C. The pretzels are a discriminative stimulus, while the light must be a conditioned, motivating operation. D. The pretzels establish water's value, and the light is a conditioned reinforcer because it accompanies responding. Do not infer stimulus control from value-altering evidence alone. Choose B. The pretzels establish water's value. The light's function requires its learning and contingency history. Salty food supports a value-altering effect, but response change in the light's presence does not identify what relation the light has historically signaled or altered. The pretzels can establish water as more valuable. Classifying the light as a discriminative stimulus, motivating operation, or other stimulus requires evidence about its conditioning and the response, reinforcer contingency. The trap here is that value change does not establish discriminative stimulus control. A. Higher responding in the light is compatible with discriminative stimulus control, but differential availability history is not provided, so the classification is not proved. C. Salty food changes water's current value rather than signaling a button contingency, and the light's motivating operation history is not established. D. A stimulus that accompanies responding is not thereby a conditioned reinforcer. A reinforcing effect requires a consequence relation. Topography and temporal presence do not define stimulus function. Identify the value-altering or availability signaling history. Question 22. An adult client previously authorized a BCBA to use a recognizable graph and video in a professional workshop. Before a new workshop, the client says they no longer want recognizable material shown. The same teaching point can be made with de-identified examples. What is the best action? A. Use the existing authorization because a withdrawal must be written before it changes the permitted disclosure. B. Honor the client's current withdrawal. Remove recognizable material, and teach with de-identified examples. C. Remove the client's name from the graph, but use the recognizable video because the original authorization remains on file. D. Ask the caregiver to reconfirm permission and restrict the workshop to professionals before using the original materials. Separate prior permission from present willingness to be identifiable. For this comparison, B is strongest. Honor the client's current withdrawal, remove recognizable material, and teach with de-identified examples. The client with decision-making capacity currently withdraws permission. The disclosure is recognizable and public, and de-identified material fully meets the teaching purpose. The BCBA should respond to the client's current decision and minimize disclosure. Because the teaching objective can be met without recognizable material, de-identification preserves the educational purpose without overriding the client's expressed withdrawal. The trap here is that withdrawal changes what may be shown. A. Treating the prior authorization as controlling ignores the client's present withdrawal and the available lower disclosure alternative. C. Removing a name does not make a recognizable video non-identifiable, and the client has withdrawn permission for recognizable use. D. Caregiver permission and a professional audience do not replace the capable adult client's current decision or the duty to minimize unnecessary disclosure. When a capable client withdraws permission and de-identification still meets the purpose, honor the withdrawal and minimize disclosure. Question 23. A tablet ranks first in a preference assessment. In a later test, task responding is the same whether tablet access is contingent on responding or freely available. What is the most defensible conclusion? A. The tablet punished task responding. B. The preference assessment was invalid. C. The tablet can never function as a reinforcer. D. The tablet was preferred but did not demonstrate a reinforcing effect in this test. A preferred item is not automatically a reinforcer in this contingency. The defensible answer is D. The tablet was preferred but did not demonstrate a reinforcing effect in this test. Task responding did not increase in the contingent condition. The preference result can remain valid while the reinforcer test fails to show an effect under these conditions. The trap here is that preference does not prove reinforcement. A. No response decrease caused by contingent tablet delivery is established. B. A valid preference result need not predict reinforcement perfectly. C. One failed test does not establish permanent ineffectiveness across contexts. Keep the preference result and the reinforcer result separate. Question 24. A learner labels pictures with 100% accuracy after an immediate full-word model. Accuracy falls to 35% when the model is delayed 2 seconds. With only the initial phoneme delivered immediately, accuracy remains at 90%. Which next step best transfers control to the picture while limiting errors? A. Continue increasing the delay to the full-word model because longer delays necessarily strengthen picture control. B. Gradually reduce the size and contrast of the picture while retaining the immediate full-word model. C. Keep the full-word model immediate and thin reinforcement equally for prompted and independent responses. D. Systematically fade the partial phonemic prompt while differentially reinforcing labels emitted before the prompt. Fade the prompt that currently controls the correct response. Here, the evidence supports D. Systematically fade the partial phonemic prompt while differentially reinforcing labels emitted before the prompt. The time delay probe produces many errors, while a less intrusive partial prompt maintains high accuracy and can be faded to create independent picture-controlled responding. The data support fading prompt magnitude or content rather than immediately extending a delay that currently produces errors. Differential reinforcement for responses before the partial prompt strengthens transfer to the picture. The trap here is that fade the prompt that preserves accuracy. A. The learner's current delay data shows substantial errors. Increasing delay without adjusting the support is not justified merely because delay can sometimes transfer control. B. Fading the natural picture while preserving the strongest verbal prompt moves control away from the intended stimulus. C. Changing reinforcement density without changing the controlling antecedent prompt does not directly transfer stimulus control. Select the fading dimension from learner data. Reduce prompt intrusiveness while preserving accuracy and reinforcing responses under the natural stimulus. Question 25. After targeted coaching, a supervisee's treatment integrity rises from 55% to 94% and remains stable. The client's target behavior does not improve. Which interpretation best separates the two outcome levels? A. Supervision improved staff performance. The client intervention now requires a separate data-based evaluation. B. Supervision was ineffective because client behavior did not improve. C. The client data prove the supervisee's integrity scores are invalid. D. High integrity establishes that the client intervention is effective even without behavior change. Evaluate staff performance and client outcomes as different questions. Question 25 resolves to A. Supervision improved staff performance. The client intervention now requires a separate data-based evaluation. The directly targeted supervisee behavior improved, but the downstream client outcome did not. Supervision effectiveness can be demonstrated at the staff performance level, while client data indicate that treatment selection or other variables need separate analysis. The trap here is that staff improvement does not prove client success. B. It collapses two dependent variables and ignores the clear change in staff performance. C. Different outcomes do not by themselves invalidate directly measured integrity data. D. Implementation is necessary for interpretation, but it does not guarantee clinical effectiveness. Evaluate the supervisee outcome and the client outcome separately, then connect them cautiously. We are halfway. Take a breath and classify your misses. Did you misidentify the relation, overlook the deciding fact, choose the wrong measure or design, or select a later action before repairing a current constraint? The next 25 questions lean even harder on measurement, ethics, generalization, implementation integrity, and the order of professional decisions. Keep asking what this stem establishes, what it leaves unknown, and what the next defensible move is. Question 26. Two accounts currently predict the same writing avoidance pattern and could each suggest an intervention. One uses the measured task, break relation. The other adds an inferred low-achievement personality. No difference in feasibility or expected benefit is established. Why should the BCBA provisionally test the task, break account first? A. Parsimony, because the measure relation is adequate without adding another assumed cause. B. Selectionism, because a consequence-based history makes inferred variables impossible. C. Philosophic doubt, because both accounts must be treated as equally likely until one is disproved. D. Pragmatism, because the account linked to the easiest staff action should be tested first. Use the measured relation before adding an unsupported cause. Select A. Parsimony, because the measured relation is adequate without adding another assumed cause. The accounts have equal stated prediction, feasibility, and expected benefit. Only one requires an additional inferred cause beyond the measured relation. Parsimony favors testing the simplest adequate account before adding unnecessary constructs. The agreement to revise prevents simplicity from becoming dogma. The trap here is that use the adequate account before extra causes. B. Selectionism may explain the history, but it does not make private or inferred events impossible or decide the stated testing order. C. Philosophic doubt keeps conclusions revisable. It does not require equal weighting when one account adds an unnecessary assumption. D. Ease of staff action could matter pragmatically, but the stem explicitly provides no feasibility or benefit difference. Prefer a measured environmental relation that explains the behavior before adding an unmeasured inner cause. Question 27. One observer reports 60% using partial interval. Another reports 60% using whole interval. Why should the percentages not be treated as interchangeable? A. The procedures use different rules for a yes and have different bias patterns. B. Whole and partial interval are mathematically identical. C. Only momentary time sampling produces percentages. D. A percentage automatically equals exact duration. Choose independent tiers that protect the design. The stem makes it the best response. The procedures use different rules for a yes and have different bias patterns. The same percentage comes from different scoring contingencies. Partial records any occurrence. Whole requires occurrence throughout, so their percentages represent different summaries. The trap here is that choose independent tiers, not convenient settings. B. Their yes rules are not identical. C. All three sampling procedures can yield percentages. D. Interval percentages are not automatically exact duration. Never interpret an interval percentage without its scoring rule. Question 28. A safety package for dangerous elopement cannot later be withdrawn. Three settings are available, but staff expect rapid generalization across them. Three distinct safety response chains have stable baselines and are unlikely to change together before training. Which design choice best preserves a staggered demonstration? A. Multiple baseline across settings, because any three settings automatically form independent tiers. B. Multiple baseline across the independent safety response chains rather than the settings. C. Changing criterion across settings, because generalization strengthens stepwise control. D. A multi-element comparison of package and no package conditions within every response chain. Ask whether the later trend supports a durable effect. B. Best matches the stated decision. Multiple baseline across the independent safety response chains rather than the settings. Staggered tiers must be sufficiently independent. Expected cross-setting generalization threatens the setting tiers, while the response chains are described as stable and independent. A multiple baseline across the independent response chains preserves staggered replication without withdrawing the package and avoids the stronger generalization threat across settings. The trap here is that immediate level change can lose durability. A. The number of tiers is not enough. Predicted generalization can cause untreated setting tiers to change before intervention. C. Changing criterion requires stepwise quantitative performance criteria, not different settings that may generalize together. D. Rapid no-package alternation creates the withdrawal risk the STEM prohibits and does not solve tier dependence. For multiple baseline, choose tiers that can remain stable while other tiers receive intervention. Convenience is not independence. Question 29. During an established behavior program, a client develops coughing, wet vocal quality, and distress while eating. The BCBA has no swallowing disorder training. Existing safety procedures can pause oral trials while medical and feeding specialists are contacted. What should the BCBA do first? A. Continue the program unchanged until a specialist formally diagnoses a swallowing disorder. B. Pause the risky component, document observations, and coordinate prompt referral while maintaining safe in-scope support. C. Terminate all services immediately and provide no interim coordination outside the BCBA's competence. D. Independently modify food texture because immediate action overrides competence limits. Name both the unavoidable overlap and the safeguards that manage it. On this item, the answer is B. Pause the risky component, document observations, and coordinate prompt referral while maintaining safe in-scope support. A new possible medical risk is present, and a safe pause plus referral is available without abandoning all services. The BCBA should protect the client, remain within competence, document relevant observations, and coordinate appropriate referral and continuity. The trap here is that manage unavoidable overlap with active safeguards. A. Waiting for a diagnosis while continuing a risky component ignores present safety indicators. C. Abruptly ending all support is unnecessary when safe in-scope continuity and referral are possible. D. Urgency does not authorize practicing beyond competence when qualified medical coordination is available. When risk and competence collide, secure safety, pause the risky component, refer, and preserve safe continuity. Question 30. ABC observations show that aggression often follows difficult demands and is usually followed by a break. Staff also often deliver attention during those breaks. What conclusion is most defensible before selecting treatment? A. Prioritize an escape treatment because the repeated demand-aggression break sequence is sufficiently function-specific. B. Classify the behavior as multiply-controlled unless a later assessment rules out either observed consequence. C. Prioritize an attention treatment because attention repeatedly follows aggression during the break. D. The pattern suggests hypotheses, but function is not yet established. Treat the ABC pattern as a hypothesis, not a functional analysis. The complete interpretation is D. The pattern suggests hypotheses, but function is not yet established. The data are correlational and two consequences covary in the natural context. Descriptive data can generate hypotheses, but they do not isolate variables. The covariation of breaks and attention makes a definitive functional claim premature. The trap here is that ABC patterns suggest they do not establish function. A. The sequence supports an escape hypothesis, but descriptive covariation does not isolate the break from attention or establish causation. B. Two correlated consequences justify competing hypotheses, not a default conclusion of multiple control. C. Attention supports a second hypothesis, but its occurrence within breaks does not show that it independently reinforces aggression. Natural ABC patterns generate hypotheses. Isolated manipulation or converging evidence is needed for stronger causal conclusions. Question 31. A hand-washing chain includes a difficult soap pump step. Within that component, progressively firmer presses are reinforced until soap dispenses. Which description is best? A. Only shaping is occurring. B. Shaping is used within one component of a larger chain. C. Only chaining is occurring. D. Neither procedure applies. Decide whether the steps are response forms or successive approximations. Choose B. Shaping is used within one component of a larger chain. One component changes through approximations inside an ordered routine. The overall routine is chained while the soap pump response is shaped. The trap here is that shaping can live inside a chain. A. The larger ordered task remains relevant. C. The component-level approximation procedure also matters. D. Both procedure relations are explicitly described. Shape a component. Chain the sequence. Question 32. The team defines the intended coping skill as independently requesting help or a brief break when difficult work exceeds the learner's current skill. The goal must distinguish prompted from independent responses and demonstrate use across task types and staff. Which objective best preserves and measures that skill? A. Independently request help or a 2-minute break within 30 seconds in 4 of 5 opportunities across 3 consecutive sessions. B. After staff says, use a coping skill, select help or break within 10 seconds in 80% of difficult task trials. C. Use an appropriate coping response when needed with at least 90% accuracy according to the supervising BCBA. D. Independently request help or a 2-minute break within 30 seconds in 80% of opportunities across 2 task types, 2 staff, and 3 consecutive sessions. Put generalization in the criterion, not in a hope after mastery. For this comparison, D is strongest. Independently request help or a 2-minute break within 30 seconds in 80% of opportunities across 2 task types, 2 staff, and 3 consecutive sessions. The objective must name the intended request, score independence, define timing and opportunity-based performance, and require demonstration across both tasks and implementers. Option D preserves the functional request, excludes prompted responses, supplies a measurable criterion, and samples the skill across the 2 generalization dimensions specified in the STEM. The trap here is that generalization belongs in the mastery criterion. A. This objective measures the correct independent response, but does not demonstrate the required generalization across task types and staff. B. The response follows a direct staff prompt, so the goal does not distinguish independent coping from prompted selection or test generalization. C. The response class, opportunity definition, timing, and scoring rule are too vague for reliable measurement. A strong goal preserves the intended response and specifies independence, opportunity, timing, criterion, and required generalization contexts. Question 33. Staff can accurately describe and demonstrate a data collection procedure during supervision, but on the unit the correct forms are often unavailable and shift expectations conflict. Data completion is low. What should the supervisor address first? A. Temporarily use staff recall at shift and so treatment data can continue while the system is reviewed. B. Run a brief booster training and compare completion before changing the unit system. C. Fix materials and expectations before assuming a skill deficit. D. Add individual feedback and a completion incentive while leaving forms and shift expectations unchanged. Repair access and workflow before blaming the trainee. The defensible answer is C. Fix materials and expectations before assuming a skill deficit. The staff demonstrate the skill under supervision, while missing materials and conflicting expectations obstruct workplace performance. The evidence points to antecedent and systems barriers rather than an acquisition deficit. The supervisor should make correct performance possible and clear, then monitor the effect. The trap here is that repair the work system before retraining. A. Recall-based recording changes measurement quality and works around rather than first correcting the documented system barriers. B. A booster can refresh the skill, but staff already demonstrate it and the identified antecedent barriers would remain. D. Consequences may influence performance, but they cannot make unavailable forms accessible or clarify incompatible expectations. Can do, but does not do suggests a performance environment problem. Cannot do suggests a skill problem. Question 34. Before a first teaching trial, a new technician reads, wait 5 seconds before prompting, and watches a supervisor model the delay. The technician waits correctly before receiving feedback, Later consequences refine timing. What is the most defensible account of the initial performance? A. Rule and model control may both contribute initially. Later feedback can shape performance further. B. Pure imitation, because a modeled delay rules out control by the written statement. C. Pure rule control, because accurate first trial performance rules out control by the observed model. D. Contingency-shaped behavior from the start, because all correct behavior must contact direct consequences. Ask which source controlled the first performance and which source was tested later. Here, the evidence supports A. Rule and model control may both contribute initially. Later feedback can shape performance further. Two plausible antecedent sources, the written rule and model performance, occur before the first response, so the stem cannot isolate a pure source. Initial performance may be controlled by the rule and model. Later direct consequences can refine or maintain it without proving that they established the first response. The trap here is that early behavior can have more than one source. B. Model control can contribute, but the explicit written statement also specifies the response and cannot be excluded. C. A rule can contribute, but the observed model remains a viable source of control and cannot be excluded by first trial accuracy. D. Later feedback can shape performance, but it occurs after the initial response and cannot explain that response's acquisition. When rule, model, and consequences all occur, do not claim pure control without a comparison that isolates them. Question 35. After intervention begins, aggression drops immediately from 8 to 10 episodes to 3 episodes per session. Across the next 6 sessions, however, it rises steadily from 3 to 7. Which interpretation is strongest? A. There is an immediate level change, but the worsening treatment trend weakens confidence in a durable effect. B. The effect is strong because the immediate level reduction and limited overlap outweigh the later trend. C. There is no effect because the final treatment point approaches baseline, so the initial level change is irrelevant. D. The effect is stable because mean treatment level is lower. Trend matters only when baseline also trends. Read level and trend together. Question 35 resolves to A. There is an immediate level change, but the worsening treatment trend weakens confidence in a durable effect. The data show 2 different features, a promising immediate drop and a subsequent trend back toward baseline levels. The immediate level change is meaningful, but the increasing treatment trend suggests deterioration. Both features must be interpreted before claiming stable effectiveness. The trap here is that level and trend must be read together. B. The immediate reduction is real, but a sustained countertherapeutic trend directly threatens durability and cannot be outweighed by the first point alone. C. The late deterioration matters, but it does not erase the observed immediate level change. The defensible interpretation must describe both. D. A lower mean can coexist with systematic deterioration, and treatment trend is relevant even when baseline is flat. Read level, trend, variability, overlap, and immediacy together. Do not let one attractive feature decide the graph. Question 36. 2 studies both show a gradual downward trend. Study 1 alternates 2 conditions every session. Study 2 lowers a program criterion in steps. Why can the studies have different design labels? A. Any downward trend is a reversal. B. Design labels come from the experimental arrangement, not the visual trend alone. C. Only the dependent variable determines the design. D. Both must be multiple baseline. Classify the arrangement from the design, not from the graph alone. Select B. Design labels come from the experimental arrangement, not the visual trend alone. The same outcome shape is produced by different manipulations. Multi-element and changing criterion designs are defined by how the independent variable is arranged and control is tested. The trap here is that design labels come from arrangement. A. Reversal requires withdrawal and reintroduction. C. The dependent variable does not define the arrangement. D. No staggered tiers are described. Name the manipulation and replication logic before reading the trend. Question 37. In a remote community, the only qualified BCBA also serves on a small nonprofit board with a client's parent. Ending either relationship would substantially reduce access to needed services. What is the best response? A. Disclose the overlap only if a concrete conflict later affects services, while continuing both roles unchanged. B. Continue both roles, recuse from board votes involving the parent, and rely on an informal verbal agreement. C. Document and manage the risks with boundaries, consultation, monitoring, and transition if needed. D. Transfer services immediately even if no qualified provider is available during the transition. Manage the overlap instead of pretending it is absent. The STEM makes C the best response. Document and manage the risks with boundaries, consultation, monitoring, and transition if needed. The overlap may be difficult to avoid, but creates foreseeable boundary and conflict risks that require active mitigation. An unavoidable multiple relationship calls for documented risk management, clear boundaries, consultation, monitoring, and a transition plan if the risks become unmanageable. The trap here is that unavoidable overlap still requires management. A. Waiting for actual harm ignores foreseeable conflict and exploitation risks that should be addressed prospectively. B. Recusal may be one safeguard, but an undocumented informal agreement is not a complete risk management process. D. Immediate transfer may create an access harm and skips analysis of whether documented safeguards can manage the risk. Unavoidable does not mean harmless. Make the risk visible, bounded, monitored, and documented. Question 38. A client with no history of self-injury begins striking the side of the head shortly after medication change and also shows disrupted sleep and ear pulling. Existing protective procedures can be used safely while providers coordinate. What should the BCBA prioritize first? A. Contact the prescriber immediately and postpone behavioral observation until the medication response is known. B. Use protective equipment and collect 2 days of structured data before referral unless the behavior worsens. C. Protect safety and coordinate prompt medical evaluation while gathering ABC, sleep, and medication information. D. Conduct a brief latency functional analysis with medical support available before treating the health variables as relevant. Treat the medication change as a cue for medical coordination and safety review. C best matches the stated decision. Protect safety and coordinate prompt medical evaluation while gathering ABC, sleep, and medication information. Sudden onset, medication change, sleep disruption, and ear pulling indicate a possible medical variable and immediate safety concern. The BCBA should protect the client, facilitate prompt medical evaluation, and gather relevant behavioral information in parallel. Neither assessment lane should unnecessarily delay the other. The trap here is that medical clues change the first response. A. Prompt medical contact is appropriate, but safe behavioral observation can continue and may provide useful coordinated information. B. Protective procedures and structured data are appropriate, but the health indicators do not justify a fixed delay before referral. D. Experimental assessment may later be considered, but it should not precede safety action and medical coordination when new health indicators are present. Sudden behavior change plus health indicators calls for safety and referral, not a topography-based functional guess. Question 39. The correct comparison card is initially placed closest to the learner. Across trials, its position is gradually equalized with the distractors. Which description is most accurate? A positional stimulus prompt is faded. B. A movement stimulus prompt is faded. C. A physical prompt is increased. D. A verbal prompt is delayed. A location change can be a prompt even when no words are added. On this item, the answer is A. A positional stimulus prompt is faded. The location of the instructional material changes and is gradually normalized. Position is a stimulus feature. Reducing the positional difference is stimulus fading. The trap here is that changing position is a stimulus prompt. B. No movement prompt such as pointing or tapping is described. The card's position is gradually equalized, so this is positional stimulus prompt fading. C. Physical assistance is not described. D. No verbal prompt or delay is used. A location cue built into the array is a stimulus prompt. Question 40. A function-based plan lowers aggression for 2 weeks, but aggression later returns toward baseline. Recent observations show that staff reinforce the communication response on only 45% of eligible trials, and aggression still sometimes produces the programmed escape consequence. What conclusion is most defensible? A. Repeat the functional analysis before changing implementation because return to baseline means the function changed. B. Implementation failure is a competing explanation that should be corrected and measured before judging treatment effects. C. Replace functional communication training with a more intensive consequence procedure because the intervention failed under real conditions. D. Thin the communication reinforcement schedule to address presumed satiation before correcting implementation. Repair integrity before interpreting a return toward baseline. The complete interpretation is B. Implementation failure is a competing explanation that should be corrected and measured before judging treatment effects. Both critical treatment relations are implemented inconsistently at the same time behavior worsens. Low integrity prevents a clean test of the treatment. The team should restore and measure implementation before attributing the change to the intervention or hypothesis. The trap here is that low integrity weakens treatment inference. A. Return under poor implementation does not establish a function change. Repeating the analysis before repairing delivery is premature. C. Escalating to a more intensive procedure before correcting the compromised independent variable is premature. D. The stem gives direct evidence of low integrity, not satiation. Thinning would further weaken the replacement relation. Before calling a plan ineffective, confirm that its critical components actually occurred. Question 41. At baseline, both problem behavior and saying "break please" sometimes pause work. During treatment, a request always produces a 2-minute break, while problem behavior no longer delays or removes the demand. Requests increase and problem behavior decreases. Which interpretation best separates the two programmed relations? A. Both changes show negative reinforcement because both responses occur in the presence of demands. B. Escape extinction directly reinforces the request, while demand removal punishes problem behavior. C. The request contacts negative reinforcement. Problem behavior contacts escape extinction. D. The request is positively reinforced by access to a break, while problem behavior contacts negative punishment. Keep the request contingency separate from the problem behavior contingency. Choose C. The request contacts negative reinforcement. Problem behavior contacts escape extinction. The same package arranges different consequences for 2 response classes. Demand removal follows the request, but no longer follows problem behavior. Removal of demands strengthens the request, which is negative reinforcement. Continuing the demand after problem behavior withholds the previously produced escape consequence, which is escape extinction. The trap here is that request reinforcement and escape extinction are separate. A. Demand context alone does not make both relations reinforcement. Problem behavior no longer produces the prior escape consequence. B. Extinction does not directly reinforce the request, and demand removal follows the request rather than problem behavior. D. A break removes demands rather than adding a stimulus, and withholding escape is extinction rather than negative punishment. Classify each response consequence relation separately when one treatment package contains reinforcement and extinction. Question 42. The stated outcome is the percentage of 30-second intervals containing at least one brief out-of-seat response, not the percentage of time out of seat. Staff observe continuously, but enter one code per interval. Which procedure, interpretation pair, is most defensible? A. Partial interval recording. It directly scores the stated outcome, but cannot be interpreted as percentage of time engaged. B. Momentary time sampling. It estimates intervals with any occurrence when samples are evenly spaced. C. Partial interval recording. It overestimates the stated percentage because brief responses count. D. Whole interval recording. It directly estimates intervals with any occurrence but understates response duration. Ask what the scoring rule counts at the moment of the check. For this comparison, A is strongest. Partial interval recording. It directly scores the stated outcome, but cannot be interpreted as percentage of time engaged. The estimand itself is whether any occurrence happened in each interval, which is exactly the partial interval scoring rule. Partial interval recording directly measures the percentage of intervals with at least one occurrence. Bias arises only if that result is misinterpreted as percentage of time engaged. The trap here is that partial interval counts any occurrence. B. A momentary sample scores behavior only at the observation instant and can miss occurrences elsewhere in the interval. C. Counting a brief occurrence does not overestimate the percentage of intervals containing an occurrence. It only overstates duration if misinterpreted. D. Whole interval scoring requires behavior throughout the interval, so it does not match in any occurrence outcome. Name the estimand before naming interval bias. Partial interval is direct for any occurrence intervals, not for duration proportion. Question 43. A BCBA alternates two prompting procedures within each session, using a distinct card for each procedure. Procedure X always occurs first, and responding is consistently higher during procedure Y. Which change would most strengthen the conclusion that the procedure, not order or carryover, produced the difference? A. Withdraw both procedures after improvement and wait for responding to reverse. B. Raise the performance criterion gradually while keeping X first. C. Introduce the comparison at different times across participants, but keep the same order. D. Counterbalance condition order, retain discriminable cues, and examine whether the difference replicates. Look for an order confound before celebrating the higher condition. The defensible answer is D. Counterbalance condition order, retain discriminable cues, and examine whether the difference replicates. Because X always precedes Y, sequence and carryover are plausible rival explanations for the observed difference. Counterbalancing order, while preserving discriminable conditions, tests whether the difference survives changes in sequence, strengthening the multi-element comparison. The trap here is that condition order can create a false winner. A global withdrawal does not separate the two procedures or test the identified order effect. B. Changing the criterion does not control the fact that X always precedes Y. C. Staggering the same fixed order comparison across participants can replicate the order confound. In an alternating comparison, control order and carryover before attributing a difference to the procedures. Question 44. A representative consented to a toothbrushing program for an adult who cannot provide legal informed consent. The client previously accepted unflavored toothpaste, but now pushes away mint toothpaste, says stop, and moves toward the door. No urgent health risk requires completing the trial. What should the BCBA do first? A. Reduce prompt intensity and complete the current brushing step before evaluating product preference. B. End the session and suspend the entire hygiene goal until the representative reconfirms consent. C. Continue the established program because representative consent and hygiene benefit outweigh product preference. D. Pause, honor the refusal, assess the product change, and collaborate on an acceptable next step. Current refusal changes the immediate ethical action. Here, the evidence supports D. Pause, honor the refusal, assess the product change, and collaborate on an acceptable next step. The refusal is clear. The change product is a plausible variable. A previously accepted alternative exists, and there is no urgent reason to override the pause. Pausing respects the client's communication while allowing assessment of the mint product and collaborative adaptation of a socially important goal. The trap here is that current refusal outranks representative preference. A. Lower prompting may reduce intrusiveness, but completing the steps still overrides clear refusal before assessing the newly changed product. B. A pause is appropriate, but suspending the entire goal ignores the previously accepted alternative and skips collaborative adaptation. C. Representative authorization and health value matter, but neither makes moment-to-moment refusal or a feasible accommodation irrelevant. Consent establishes authorization. Ongoing assent, refusal, dignity, risk, and context still guide moment-to-moment practice. Question 45. A parent requests a goal requiring sustained eye contact during every conversation. The adolescent client says eye contact is uncomfortable but wants help initiating conversations and asking follow-up questions. No safety concern is involved. What is the best assessment-based priority? A. Prioritize gradual eye contact tolerance because the caregiver identifies it as a prerequisite for successful conversation. B. Complete a functional assessment of eye contact avoidance before beginning any social communication goal. C. Prioritize client-informed functional conversation goals and evaluate their social validity. D. Alternate eye contact and conversation goals, then retain whichever produces faster acquisition in baseline teaching probes. Prioritize a meaningful, measurable client goal when safety is not at stake. Question 45 resolves to C. Prioritize client-informed functional conversation goals and evaluate their social validity. The client identifies a meaningful functional goal and a concern about the requested response, with no safety reason to override that preference. Assessment and goal selection should be client-informed, culturally responsive, socially significant, and functionally useful. Conversation initiation and follow-up questions can meet the stated need without imposing unnecessary eye contact. The trap here is that client value matters when no safety issue exists. A. Caregiver input matters, but the STEM provides no evidence that sustained eye contact is a necessary prerequisite or worth the stated discomfort. B. Assessment may clarify variables, but a functional analysis of avoidance is not required before selecting the meaningful skills the client requested. D. Acquisition speed does not establish client value or social validity and does not justify imposing the more uncomfortable response. Choose goals for client value and functional significance, then make those goals measurable. Question 46. A task analysis shows that a learner can perform every hand-washing step when each is prompted, but does not complete the full ordered routine independently. For speech, the learner currently says M and will be reinforced for progressively closer forms of milk. Which plan best matches the response structures? A. Use forward chaining for hand washing and backward chaining for the successive vocal approximations. B. Shape longer independent portions of hand washing and use total task chaining for the speech target. C. Use total task chaining with prompt fading for hand washing and shape the vocal response toward milk. D. Use backward chaining for both because each program ends with a terminal response. Separate the sequence of components from the shaping of one response form. Select C. Use total task chaining with prompt fading for hand washing and shape the vocal response toward milk. Hand washing is an ordered sequence of already available component responses. Milk is one response form refined through successive approximations. Total task chaining can organize and fade support across the known hand-washing sequence, whereas shaping changes the form of the single vocal response through successive approximations. The trap here is that sequence and response form are different. A. The hand-washing procedure is plausible, but progressively closer pronunciations are not an ordered chain of different component responses. B. Total task fits the established hand-washing analysis, but closer pronunciations are shaping, not a response chain. D. Backward chaining could apply to hand washing, but a series of closer pronunciations remains shaping rather than chaining. Sequence of component responses points to chaining. Closer versions of one response point to shaping. Question 47. During study period, each student who completes 12 problems accurately earns an individual break. After the period, one student is selected at random. If that student met the criterion, the entire class earns music time. How should the two programmed outcomes be classified? A. Layered. Independent contingencies for the individual breaks plus a dependent group contingency for music. B. Layered. Independent contingencies for the breaks plus an interdependent group contingency because everyone receives music. C. Layered. Dependent contingencies for both outcomes because one randomly selected student controls the class reward. D. A single dependent group contingency. The individual breaks do not create a separate contingency type. Identify each programmed outcome. One arrangement can contain more than one group contingency. The STEM makes it the best response. Layered. Independent contingencies for the individual breaks plus a dependent group contingency for music. Each student's own performance controls that student's break, while one selected student's performance controls a shared class outcome. The individual breaks are independent because each student earns an outcome from that student's own performance. The music outcome is dependent because one selected member's performance determines the outcome for the whole group. The trap here is that layered outcomes can use different group contingencies. B. A shared reward is not automatically interdependent. Here the group outcome depends on one selected student rather than a group criterion. C. The selected student controls only the class music outcome, not the individual breaks earned separately by each student. D. The dependent group bonus does not erase the separately programmed independent contingencies for individual breaks. Classify each programmed outcome separately by whose performance controls it. Shared delivery alone does not determine the group contingency type. Question 48. A function-based intervention initially reduces aggression. Over the next month, aggression rises while procedural integrity observations fall from 92% to 48%, especially for reinforcement of the replacement response. What is the best next analytic step? A. Restore and verify critical components, then re-evaluate outcomes before replacing the plan. B. Add response blocking while the current reinforcement schedule and staff supports remain unchanged. C. Conduct an abbreviated functional analysis before making any implementation changes. D. Compare high and low integrity sessions as they naturally occur before helping staff repair implementation. Do not replace a treatment while the implemented treatment is drifting. A best matches the stated decision. Restore and verify critical components, then re-evaluate outcomes before replacing the plan. Outcome deterioration co-varies with a large drop in implementation of a function-based critical component. Low integrity prevents a clean conclusion about treatment efficacy. The plan should address implementation barriers, restore the critical components, and then evaluate whether outcomes recover. The trap here is that restore integrity before replacing treatment. B. Adding a protective component does not restore the missing function-based reinforcement or permit a clean efficacy conclusion. C. A new analysis may eventually be warranted, but the documented loss of a critical component is the more proximal rival explanation to test first. D. Waiting for naturally poor implementation prolongs a known quality problem. Repair integrity, then reassess outcomes. Before replacing an intervention, verify that the intervention being evaluated is the one actually delivered. Question 49. A supervisee implements 9 of 10 teaching steps correctly, but consistently prompts before the planned 5-second delay. Client accuracy is improving, so the supervisee argues that the timing difference does not matter. Which feedback is best? A. Client accuracy is improving, so the 90% integrity score is sufficient and no change is needed. B. Instruction and reinforcement were accurate. The prompt was early. Rehearse the 5-second delay and measure the next trials. C. Review the full protocol independently and address the timing issue in next month's evaluation. D. Shorten the written delay to match your current performance because outcome data are improving. Choose feedback that names, rehearses, and checks the drift. On this item, the answer is B. Instruction and reinforcement were accurate. The prompt was early. rehearse the 5-second delay, and measure the next trials. One critical step is repeatedly implemented differently from the protocol, and improving outcome data do not by themselves establish that the deviation is acceptable. The selected feedback acknowledges accurate components, names the observable deviation, requires immediate rehearsal, and plans direct measurement of the corrected performance. The trap here is that feedback must name and rehearse the drift. A total integrity score and improving client data do not justify ignoring a consistently altered critical step. C. Delayed, broad review misses an immediate opportunity to correct and verify the specific performance. D. Changing the protocol to fit drift is premature without analysis and authorization of the modification. Effective feedback identifies what worked, names the observable change, and creates a near-term opportunity to practice it. Question 50. During probe trials, a learner sees either a bat or owl picture while hearing, which animal flies at night. The question alone evokes several possible answers, and the learner does not reliably name either animal when a picture is shown alone. When both are present, bat occurs for the bat and owl for the owl. Which interpretation best accounts for these stronger, picture-specific responses? A. Pure tacting under conditional control. The question selects a visual feature but contributes no intraverbal strength. B. Divergent multiple control. Because the question evokes several names, the combined trial must be classified as divergent. C. Convergent multiple control. The picture and verbal question each contribute control to the same response on a trial. D. Formal echoic control. The animal name is strengthened because the spoken question contains related verbal content. Track how the question and the picture combine to control one response. The complete interpretation is C. Convergent multiple control. The picture and verbal question each contribute control to the same response on a trial. The verbal question narrows the relevant class. The picture specifies the animal, and the two sources together strengthen one picture-specific response. The nonverbal picture and the verbal question both contribute to the response emitted on that trial. Conditional selection may also be present, but the question alone and picture alone probes rule out treating the response as a pure tact controlled by only one source. The trap here is that two sources can converge on one response. A. The question alone probes show that verbal antecedents contribute intraverbal strength. They are not merely selecting a visual feature. B. The question may evoke multiple candidates by itself, but the analyzed combined trial contains two sources converging on one response. D. Related meaning does not establish the point-to-point correspondence and formal similarity required for echoic control. When verbal and nonverbal antecedents each add strength to the same response, analyze convergent control even if conditional selection also occurs. Across these 50 questions, the same habits keep returning. Start with evidence rather than a label. Track the relation rather than the surface form. Match the measure and design to the decision. Protect safety, consent, competence, dignity, and treatment integrity before escalation. And when two options both sound reasonable, ask what extra fact would have to be true for the weaker option to win. That is the exam move we want to become automatic. If this set helped, keep the practice going with our free BCBA mock exam for time practice. Then use the quick study guide to review the concept behind each miss. Both complete links are shown on screen. Subscribe, share the question that made you pause, and return for the next set. We are building a clearer BCBA exam library one deciding detail at a time. If you want a structured way to review the relations behind these misses, use our quick study guide. Work through the definitions, contrasts, examples, and exam traps at your own pace. The complete guide link is shown on screen, and the free BCBA mock exam remains available when you are ready to test transfer. We are building a clearer study routine, one deciding detail at a time.